February 7th, 1996, Second Principles of the Infinite Way class. Good evening, everybody. I hope I've got both microphones turned on and should have a better quality of recording than we got last week. We're still talking about the nature of God. We started last week talking about the fact that we can't talk about God, and then we went after the task anyway. And we had talked about the three omnis that are always mentioned by all the religions: omnipotent and omniscient and omnipresent. And the fourth one that needs to be included there is eternal, which I guess we could call omnitemporal. Is that a word, omnitemporal? So we can have four omnis. Yeah, it's pretty easy to think about omniscient knows everything, and omnipresent is everywhere, and omnipotent has all power, the only power. Eternal is the one that starts to stretch my mind, because my mind immediately wants to know how long is eternal. You know, what was before eternal. That, of course, is the mystical realization. It's the question, what was before eternal, doesn't have meaning. The time is within God rather than God within time. So the whole question makes no sense. God is eternal in the sense that time and space don't even exist in God, don't even exist in the fourth dimensional reality. Time and space are constructs of the mind, and they exist in the 3D world. They're like in termites, talking about the dream that we can have that goes on, where we have a dream that seems to last for a year, and we may have children and family and live on a planet that has green skies and purple sand, and have all these wonderful experiences there with friends and everything, and then we wake up. And the question is, where is that space? Now that I'm awake, where is that space? And what about that time? There was a whole year in which I have experiences that I may well have learned from. I may have had a lot of experiences with the family I was with for that year, and I learned some things and become wise. My inner teacher may have taught me some things through that dream. And nonetheless, now I'm awake, and the dream is over, and that time never existed, and that space never existed. It was created, in fact, by my mind. And I have to keep going back to, I'm so glad we dream, because that's the only thing I can use that gets me connected to the sense of these omnis. In that same dream we can talk about omnipresent, in that whole dream is just the consciousness of the dreamer. And so certainly the dreamer consciousness is omnipresent. In fact, all there is the consciousness of the dreamer. There's nothing else there except the consciousness of the dreamer. So space and time are all within the consciousness, created by the consciousness, created by the mind. The consciousness is omnipresent in that dream world. The consciousness is omnipotent in that dream world. There is no power inside the dream except the power of the consciousness that's creating the dream. And the consciousness that's creating the dream certainly is omniscient. It's the only one that knows what's going on, and it knows everything that's going on in the dream, because the interesting point is that anything which is not consciously in the dream doesn't exist. It's not like we think in this world that if I'm not conscious of the other side of Palos Verdes Hill over there, it's over there. But you can see in the dream that anything that's not in the consciousness of the dreamer doesn't exist in any sense of the world, of the word. The dream is just the consciousness that is being realized. So this is the leaping off point. This is where minds get expanded, where my mind enjoys playing. And this is going to keep coming up over and over as we go through the whole thing. When we get to all of these points that we're talking about last week and this week about the nature of God, of course, show up again. Obviously, the nature of man, the nature of mind, the nature of error, the nature of everything else has to be the nature of God, because all there is God. We're just approaching these topics from, as many different sides as we can to try to get a clear understanding of what the teaching of the infinite way is and what Joel is saying, trying to explicitly say what Joel has been saying and to think about it and think about the implications. One thing you can say about eternality and about God, as far as it appears to influence us, is that God has always been doing whatever God is doing. It's not like we can influence God to do something tomorrow that it's not doing today. God is always doing what God is doing. It has always been doing what it is doing. It will always be doing what it's doing. And it's quite independent of anything that we might, through invocations or sacrifices or whatever. God is just being God, and God is doing God's things for God's purposes, and that's it. We can have no effect on God at all. We can have effect on our experience. The sun is always shining. And if we're in the house, that's of no use to us. If we're trying to get a tan, we have to go outside into the sun. Or if there's clouds, then the fact that the sun is shining is of no use to us unless we fly up above the clouds. The cloud is always shining. It's always available. It is our requirement that we avail ourselves of that sunshine. I'm definitely not a Christian. I'm not at all limited to that, but I do like a lot of the things that Jesus said, because he said he was just a wonderful mystic. One of the 2 or 3 real, very, very, very highlights, like Buddha. And the simple things he said, the rain falls on the just and the unjust, is one thing about God's doing what God's doing with no interest in us at all. And the other thing he said about eternality, he said, before Abraham was, I am. And that sentence is just so wonderful. He's talking about a guy that lived 2,000 years before him. And he uses the past tense was, but then he says, I am. He doesn't say, I was. I was before Abraham was, or I was and have been. He just says, before Abraham was, I am. And I am is God. He's speaking from his higher self, his fourth dimensional I am, from the capital S self, which is sometimes written as I am, all caps, but he's indicating there the timelessness of God. See, there's no time in that. He says, before Abraham was, I am. It's always I am. So I really enjoy that's a real indication to me of his clarity, that he didn't say before Abraham was this I, that I am was, or something like that. Just the simplicity before Abraham was I am. We've already started to touch consciousness. What we use words like God is spiritual, And by that, we don't really know what spiritual means. We don't have a handle for that, which is good. That means that it's possible that God is spiritual, because if we can label it or get a hold of it, that's not it. But we think of spiritual as not material, and that's good. But I kept trying to get a handle on what that was, and when I finally got the understanding that God is consciousness, and saying all there is God is the same as saying all there is consciousness, and in fact the whole thing is consciousness, then the words omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, and omnitemporal all make sense. It's the I am that, hard to say. If I get real quiet and just sort of breathe very, very softly, I am, with almost no voicing of it at all, just the thought of I am, sort of in all caps, it's that I, the consciousness. There is that awareness. And that awareness is in us, and that is the awareness that is actually an awareness of the consciousness, and it is of the consciousness that God is. It is that I am that Moses had discovered when he said, I am that I am. Oh, I am that I am. The I am. Got it. My I am and that I am are one. All there is God. All there is consciousness. So God and consciousness and spirituality are interchangeable, and God expresses itself as individual consciousness, and that individual consciousness is what we are. It is constantly expressing itself in millions and millions of forms, and these forms are not material forms, they're all spiritual forms, they're all ideas, they're all concepts. I'm just going to have to babble about this, there's no way to give you a picture of this. I'm going to just keep saying the things that come to me about what it is like. It's like the images in our own mind. We are, and this all is images in God's consciousness. God stirred itself and thought, and in that thinking was the Big Bang, the creation of the universe, and all these things appeared, the 10,000 things Lao Tzu calls it. But the 10,000 things that appeared are all concepts in God's mind. They're not material. Now, this materiality that we're dealing with is an added overtone that's thrown into it by our own human mind. The 3D mind then creates the material overtone. The sight, taste, touch, smell, hearing, these things all are added things by our human mind, and they have no more reality than those things which we could see, hear, taste, touch, or smell in our dreams. They're added things that are created by mind in the three-dimensional world. The reality is fourth-dimensional, and it is spiritual. It is consciousness. It's all ideas in God, and I don't know any other words I can say about that. Anybody getting any sense of what I'm saying? Anybody hearing anything? Does anybody any chew on this one a while? Can we turn this into a discussion instead of a mystical exposition?
I get really caught between my mind and my thoughts and trying to believe that that is God's consciousness. I'm really still confused about that.
Okay, we will certainly hit a lot on that as soon as we get to the nature of man when we're dealing in this. Take the five senses and add thinking to them as a sixth sense. Add your brain as a receiver to all the thoughts that are running about. And think of this as your human mind. And think of all those thoughts as the things which are creating your images, your life, your experience. And that is certainly not God. That is you. But it is the expression through a glass darkly is used. What you're seeing is, instead of seeing the reality which is spiritual and clear and harmonious, what you are seeing is your own interpretation of it as influenced by the fact that you're living in duality and believing in powers of good and evil and short and tall and ugly and pretty and things like that.
Is that hypnotism?
Yes. It's all hypnotism. Is duality, human mind, hypnotism. Those are all the same word. Joel likes to use hypnotism, but he also uses a bunch of other words. But that is our own interpretation, and we'll do a lot more work on this before we're done. But the fact is that there's only one consciousness, and that consciousness is God, and so everything in consciousness is God. Once again, the person, when you're having a dream, the Anya in the dream has a mind and thoughts and is seeing things. And she has memories of perhaps a history that happened before the dream started, and she has memories of relationships that aren't in the dream, that never were in the dream and never existed, and the relationships may or may not have any bearing to this world, but she has all these thoughts. Now, those are dream Anya's thoughts, but you see, they're really your consciousness's thoughts. But they needn't have any relationship to your reality at all, to the extent that she may be influenced. But now, if she was a truth student in your dream and had done a great deal of study and understood that, she might be absolutely clear and essentially have erased her dream thinking and have a clear mind in that and only be aware of your thoughts. And that would be the awareness of the I am, that she really is one level removed. Okay? Did we just get deeper into it, or did we get less deep into it? Let me see what
I was just going to say, when I experience God consciousness, it's just the clarity is so strong. It just is like it snaps in me, and I just know that I know.
Yes.
And when I'm worried or concerned or anxious or all that, I know it's just my own mind going through all these thoughts and concerns. So I had a major thing happen today, and it just made me really look at how much I have to look at. As I was getting all my human thoughts into it, I just stopped and said, the Father and I are one. And then it just turned all that off. Mm-hmm. And that I myself can do nothing. the Father within does the work.
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't know this, with what I went through today, I would have just been on a major, hypnotized for days, emotional, and done all kinds of things.
Exactly. And that's the point. That's what the people that are doing the script group, that's what flashcards are all about. That's a flashcard. Those things are like flashcards. They're to stop the process and give yourself a gap. The fact is that in the moment that you, 3D human mind, are silent, the intuition can strike, the clarity can happen, the answer is there, and it is always recognized by the God that is within you, if you will, the I am that's in you. It will be recognized by that and known to be true. So that, in fact, is the process. But as long as the human mind is running, that's how I know when to call my sponsor. The minute I start thinking about something, I'm well aware of the fact that my mind can absolutely support either side of any argument and make it convincing. And the minute I decide to do one side of it, the mind will support the other side. And if I say, yeah, you're right, and go there, it will start supporting the first side. And the minute that flip-flop has happened once, I know I'm hopeless, I'm out of it, there is no way I can resolve this. And I call my sponsor, and she usually gives me some very simple little truth, and it's clear. Minds, that's what they do, and as long as our mind is active, as long as there are words, then that's not what we're talking about. But when we are silent, then you can, through intuition, make contact with the fourth dimensional consciousness and get answers. They appear like answers to us because that's the only context that they can be translated in. There are no more words coming through than anything, but the mind will translate those as words. And often it will translate them as words. If we happen to be Christian, it will translate them as words we read in the Bible. If we happen to be Buddhist, it will translate them as sutras. It will translate them in something that sounds nice and mystical to it. But the fact is that is a pop into the fourth dimensional consciousness. In that sense, another topic here is that your consciousness is an infinite source. This is exactly the process. Through your own consciousness, which is directly linked to God consciousness, which is God consciousness, if not blocked. We're just talking about clouds, the sun and the clouds. We're just talking about clouds up there. Like the sun is up there, and there's a lot of clouds, and the clouds are generated by our mind, and all we're talking about is clouds, and if you can, as your mind gets slower through practicing meditation and various practices, spiritual disciplines, your mind gets slower and gaps start appearing in the clouds and little rays of sun get through. And it can be accomplished that the sky gets clear. And that is the state that people like Jesus or Gautama Buddha or Robert Adams or Rashneesh or people like that were at. The sky was clear. Never a cloud. And that's what we're working at. In the 3D world, there is no God except individual consciousness which is aware of God. In other words, people are always asking, well, why is there so much misery and this and that and the other thing going on in this 3D world? And the fact is that a basic principle of the infinite way is that there is no God in the 3D world. God is not aware of that. God is not interested in that. God is only where God is realized. God is consciousness. God is where God is realized, and where God is not realized, then the people who don't realize God are experiencing a world created by themselves, which does not include God. And people who do realize God experience a world created by themselves, which does include God. And It's really fundamentally that simple. There is no God in the 3D world except insofar as it is introduced through an illumined mind who is doing exactly what you were describing, Diane, has cleared the thoughts, has opened the channel, and has had the realization or the awareness. That is the basic principle, the tool for supply, that is the tool for healing, that is the basic process, that is the fundamental process that the infinite way practitioners use. And to the extent that someone has come to an infinite way practitioner and asked for help, they have aligned their mind with the practitioner's mind. And then when the practitioner makes that contact is made in both minds. And the person who is in contact with the practitioner is also elevated to be able to see the harmony. So that's what that process is about. So the answer is there's no God in the 3D world. Sorry, that doesn't happen. There is God in your either you are aware of God or you are not. The other answer is to your question earlier, Anya. Obviously, all of God consciousness is always available to all of us. And the difference is how much of it we're aware of. Last week I made a distinction between the words consciousness and awareness. And I'm talking about awareness, not of your left ankle. I'm talking about awareness of God. But to the extent that you are aware of God, you are experiencing God. And you can increase your awareness of God and hence increase your God experience, i.e. your grace. And if you are unaware of God, and you can be absolutely unaware of God while going to Mass 5 times a week, or running a church and preaching 3 Masses a week, you can be doing all these things and be totally unaware of God and not experience any God in your life, or you can be anybody, anywhere, sitting on a mountain somewhere in total awareness of God. And so the accoutrements, the ceremonies, the rituals, the prayers, any of that stuff has nothing to do with it. It is your personal awareness of God that determines. That is grace. Your awareness of God is your grace. And it's through grace that you get it, but it is grace. And there's another one of those things that's wired backwards, yes?
How do you explain a spiritual awakening for like a drunk or an atheist who one day all of a sudden, has had no belief, has had no discipline, no work towards, no trying to increase awareness, no any of that, and one day something happens where there's...
That's interesting, and I have thought about that, and so has Barbara. When I get to a place, the complete, total, and incomprehensible demoralization, where I have a moment of total helplessness and total humility and silence. Mind stops in that moment. I can't do it. In that pause, there is a crack. And in that pause, the clouds part just slightly, and a shaft of sunlight gets through and it hits you. And that's the moment of clarity. Now, the clouds come back real quick. But you've had it, and it has started something in you which will continue to grow. And it can be maintained or lost and found again, but that will happen. But the moment of clarity is a moment of total humility and silence and not Lee. In that, it's a I give up, as Lee. Lee, I give up. And in that moment, in that second, there's not a we. And in that second is all it takes, because that's all it's trying to do. Other biblical quotations are, I stand at the door and knock, meaning that God is constantly trying to get in, but we don't let it in. And, it's a mechanism that wants to happen. It is the nature of the universe for that to happen. It is waiting for an opportunity to happen. All it needs is for the mind to stop.
And that can happen through being humbled, or in a case like Robert when he was 14 years old sitting in a classroom, or Jesus, I don't know nothing about his life. They're opened up in a different way?
They were opened up in their previous life, almost undoubtedly. Okay. They just came back here, and they needed something to crack it. But this time it wasn't a little beam of light that came through. In the case of somebody like Robert or Jesus or Buddha, I mean, the fact is that this was a total realization. No more clouds, and that has to be a remembrance. I mean, these guys were obviously very, very clear in a previous lifetime. Joel was probably not quite as high in a previous lifetime, although very, very high, because he had to work to get there. It took him from 1928 to 1964 to get there. He just got clicks every year, click, 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 as he got more and more insights and more stuff. Most of us go click by click.
What do you mean by 1928 to 1964? I mean, you mean...
In 1928 was when Joel had his first big knock your socks off realization and became a healer, and had essentially the truth of the infinite way given to him in one experience in 1928, but he didn't have any understanding of it. And from 1928 to 1964 was just a never-ending succession of mystical spiritual experiences and revelations to Joel, which elevated him and raised him and increased his awareness, and elevated him and raised him and increased his awareness, until in 1964 when he died, he probably, this is an assumption, but I think it's from what I've heard of his tapes, the later tapes, it's pretty clear that he essentially left the body because he was done with it. Because he had...
He wasn't really that old, was he?
He was in his 70s. Yeah, early mid-70s. Yeah, and he was perfectly healthy. I mean, right. He taught a class that afternoon and said, I'll see you tomorrow, and left. Yeah, so I'm sure he was just done, and he never did want to teach, as a matter of fact. He just wished he could be left alone. He didn't want to teach at all. But God kept sending him places and giving him classes to teach. Phenomenal. He had 50,000 Infinite Way families at one point, that were getting the monthly letter. All this through with no advertisement and never seeking anybody. I mean, this is just flow. This is a lesson in supply. Okay, a couple of comments from Joel. I said there is no God except individual illumined mind. And then the comments are, an illumined consciousness is the state of consciousness that does not hate, love, or fear error in any form. Everybody's going to get a copy of this, by the way. And if you didn't get your outline from last week, this is the outline from last week, actually. But if you didn't get a copy of it, pick one up, because I forgot to hand them out. And it is always at rest in my kingdom. It is always in the fourth dimensional consciousness. It is always at peace in 4D awareness. It's not in this world. It's never in the 3D world. And that's another way of that's just a restatement of it. Does not hate, love, fear, error in any form. It's unattached. It knows all appearances are illusory. And the other little kicker he likes to throw in there is it does not resist evil. Because it knows all appearances are illusory, obviously. If you're resisting evil, you're tying yourself to the three-dimensional world because you're stating that there is such a thing.
Seems like the test is to be here and not get triggered by anything.
You betcha.
It's almost like just constantly detaching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Barbara Mull's work, in the script work, those things which you fear or desire or love or hate, in the sense of the human love as distinct from God love, are the things that tie you to a three-dimensional world. And the state of clarity is a state that does not have emotion. It has feelings, but does not have emotion, which are feelings with dialogue. The difference. Emotion is dialogue running. It's like the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is not optional. Suffering is optional. You can take your finger out of the wound, or you can leave your finger in the wound. All right. The illumined consciousness has no emotion. It has feelings and expresses feeling. Joy, bliss, sadness, all these things happen. But anger, self-pity, that sort of thing. Pity doesn't happen. Compassion happens. Happiness doesn't happen. Joy happens. That kind of a thing. And the illumined consciousness has dropped all concern. That's a lovely statement. Drop all concern about everything is the illumined consciousness.
I like what Joel said in one of the books about, when you were talking about not resisting evil. He calls the shadows, that all these appearances that come into our mind. And he said in this book, well, thank you, shadow. And I've been using that, and it's so powerful. It's like, my mind and my worry or my concern or whatever, it's just this appearance trying to, get me off into that world. And I'm thanking it a lot, so it happens a lot.
Cool.
But at least I'm aware of it, and somehow by thanking it,
yes,
it's like, it's really works.
Do you see that thought is already the half step back, which is transcendental? You are no longer dealing with the shadow. You are now dealing with the thanks to the shadow. You have transcended it. That half a step back is the step into the transcendental consciousness. That's all we're talking about. That half a step back is the whole thing. You're suddenly no longer dealing with that as a reality. You're dealing with it in its truth.
Well, by back, you mean you're just detaching?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Just like detached. Okay. Back to the things about God. God is creative. And all there is God, and all of this is God's creation as modified by our own minds, but it's all God's creation. We will work on sitting in the silence. And what I mean by silence is as good a word, as close a word as I can come to it, but some people say void. And since the Eastern mystics use void, the Christian mystics talk about silence. But none of those words are right. No word is right. If you have a whiteboard, you can write on it in any color except white, and you can see it. There has to be something against which you can see the colors. And of course, if you have a blackboard, then you can see the white chalk, but not the black. But you have to see something. There has to be something against which you can see things, okay? Now, the silence I'm talking about is so quiet that you can hear silence against it. And it's so vacuous that you can see a void against it, because if there weren't something that you could measure the void against, you couldn't measure void. If there weren't something that behind the silence that you can measure silence again, you couldn't measure the silence. The fact is that you can't see silence unless there's something quieter behind it. You can't see white unless there's something not white behind it, that you can't on the whiteboard. So we're talking about these words don't have any meaning, but they give you the idea. Vacuum certainly is wrong, void certainly is wrong, silence certainly is wrong, but it is the unitive primordial state before creation happened. If you can think of all there is consciousness, and then you can think of consciousness before it's conscious of itself, before it has thought. If you can think of a dormant consciousness that hasn't yet thought, maybe that is a hint about it. That's as close as I can come to it, and I use the one that it can't have any properties at all, because if any property that it has, we could never recognize that property in our existence. So when we're talking about getting into the silence, we're talking about going into, sitting in this gap, this no thing, this Advaita, this non-dualism, this non-duality. It's not one. You can't say one, because if there's one, then there's not one. And it's not that either. Yeah.
And it's interesting because once you notice you're in it, you're not in it anymore.
Yeah.
It's an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah. When the head says, this is it,
you're not there anymore.
It should have said was. But nonetheless, it's there.
Is that, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. No.
In meditation, is that the moment that I've experienced just realizing that I'm here and that it's absolutely silent?
If there's no words, yes.
Yes. And then the words come.
If you're talking
about?
If you're talking about it, no.
Yeah.
If it's true, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
Yeah, I know what you mean.
that's the state. Mm-hmm.
The minute you know that it's there, it's not. That's interesting, yeah.
The exercise that Robert gave us, which I really love for being there, is when you first wake up, there is a period of time of some length between when you're here and your mind makes its first thought. Robert talks about the mind coming from the heart, and he's talking about the spiritual heart, the connection with what is. The mind has to come out of your heart and run up into your brain and think. And so there's that pause. So if you practice, and you can practice, I've done this and I've had the experience, you can, when you go to bed at night, remind yourself that when you become conscious in the morning, you're not going to think, because you can't remind yourself in the morning or it's too late. But it sounds impossible to wake up in the morning and remember not to think, because remembering not to think, you already blew it. But you can set yourself up at night. What you go to sleep with at night is what you're going to wake up with in the morning. You can set yourself up at night, and you can practice on this for a while, and you can wake up in the morning and there's this gap. And usually it's about that long, followed by, oh my God, the first time. But then very quickly it becomes a second or two, and then very quickly it becomes 5 seconds or 10 seconds, and that is an illumined state.
But if you wake up with no alarm clock,
then you haven't got a chance. Now you need to get to bed in time to wake up before you need to wake up naturally if you're going to do this experiment. But that's one way to achieve silence, and we'll work on another one. The awareness exercise that we started last week will hopefully wind up there. The third step, it gets us to the silence, and of course I don't know how long it will take for various people to achieve that, but the steps are very simple. It's a very simple exercise for getting to the silence. Any of it, there was this silence, and then God thought. And that's the Big Bang, and that's the universe. And nothing else had to happen. John said in the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word. In our beginning, before that, there was God. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. God thought. Thought occurred. Amazing. Amazing that this consciousness is there, and amazing that this thought occurred. And And that's it. And that's the act of creativeness. Now we'll discover later that the creation continues and that our minds are creative.
But when I'm sleeping, I'm not like really sleeping. I'm thinking about, thoughts come into my mind, like conscious God thoughts and the contentment and the peace. But I'm asleep, and Joel talked about it once in his books, how you're just like, you're asleep, but your consciousness is awake.
Yeah.
That's the best way to say it.
That certainly is Joel's experience the whole time. I usually sleep for like 3 or 4 hours where I'm completely unconscious. And then from that time on, I'm in some weird state between sleep and awake. And I'm having dreams and I'm having thoughts and I'm asleep and I'm awake. And, I'm in a unknown area, but I usually go to bed and go disappear. Go absolutely out of it for 3 or 4 hours. So I certainly have not ascended to Joel's level yet.
So he would be asleep, but he'd be conscious all the time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Robert has the same experience. Robert doesn't ever sleep. He's always aware that he's Robert. He said he's just always conscious. But he's quiet, his body's asleep. If you walked into his room, you'd look at it and you'd think he was asleep.
Who is Robert?
Robert Adams was my teacher for the last 5 years. And Rashneesh used to talk about, his mind, the nature of his mind is silence. He used to talk about, that he goes into his room and his mind stops. And when his mind stops, nothing's happening, in his mind, he's just blissed out wherever he is, I guess. I don't know what his experience is, but he says, and then somebody comes into the room, and he says, "Hello, Bhagwan. Hello, Gangaji," or whatever her name is, So every time, it starts up, he re-greets himself and re-greets them, and there's been this gap in between. So his experience is the other. He's not, there's not a word in his experience. When he's not actually with somebody talking, there are no words. And I think that's mostly Robert's experience. I think Robert is mostly just wordless. I think he only talks when expected to. Not very well anymore.
And probably he doesn't have any thoughts either.
No, I'm sure he doesn't. No. Except, when words come out of his mouth, he's hearing them for the first time too. I do know that every word he says is absolutely unedited. I've just heard him say too many things that were way too off the wall for there to be an editor going on in there. So, totality is speaking through that mouth, and it's news to everybody. Except Robert would say it's news to nobody, because he doesn't think there is a Robert or anybody else.
And we're all kind of giggling because we've all met him.
Yeah.
I just wanted to let you know that we're all kind of, not because we understand anything more that Lee's saying than you do, but we have all met Robert before.
Yeah.
Does he live locally? Or?
He used to live out in Canoga Park.
Oh.
He's a very strange guy. Born in the Bronx and totally enlightened at 14. All right, just a couple more things on God, and then where are we at? Well, time-wise, I guess we'll do that, and then we'll get to the next step of the awareness exercise. God is, I said creative, God is all. And the only thing I could think to say about that is all there is God, all there is consciousness. There is nothing else. Everything else is a manifestation within God. some of the manifestations within. And when I'm saying manifestation, I'm not talking about creation of matter. I'm talking about creation of ideas, of spiritual entities, spiritual ideas in God's consciousness. The matter is added by us, gratis. But eventually it all comes down to being within God. All there is consciousness, exactly as if you go back to the dream and view it from the perspective of the you in the dream. I mean, all there really is consciousness, in spite of everything that's being seen there and experienced by the people in the dream. Nonetheless, all there is consciousness. I started there. My path to that was I realized that I could not create, I could not imagine. I was reading philosophy on logical positivism, and the test is, can you imagine an experiment which would prove or disprove the statement? We don't have to have the science and technology to carry it out, but can you conceive of the experiment which someday possibly could be run, which would tend to prove truth, add truth or falsity to the statement? If not, the statement is nonsense. And that's sort of the definition of logical positivism, according to the particular guy I was reading. And my question was, how can I prove there's anything out there? And what I realized was that what I see in the story is the light beams off the glass there, and the light waves bounce back to my eye with certain frequencies, and they impinge the retina, and they get converted somehow chemically into neuron sequences, and they go firing up into the brain, and they run around in the brain, and the brain says, there's a glass out there. But, I mean, all there is running around the brain is neurons and electrical impulses and stuff like that. And something in the brain, we're supposed to believe, recreates this green tumbler. But all the brain has ever had are these little electrical impulses. I mean, it can't recreate the tumbler. There was never a tumbler. There was only electrical impulses. It can't recreate green. There was never green. There's only these electrical impulses. Where did these things come from that it's recreating? Is my green the same as your green? How do we know what I see as green isn't what you see as red? We'll never know that unless you can crawl inside my head and look out. There's no way that I can know that there's anything out there, because at night my mind can create an entire universe, and in the day, it's creating this out of supposed electrical impulses. Why couldn't it create it without them? And then you get to thinking that some of the things I don't know that's out there is my body, and another thing I don't know that's out there is the brain in which these electrical impulses are going around. And there's no test that I can devise that will allow me to generate any evidence for or against there being any reality or any me in the sense of out there. All there is this image in something or other. So that was where I started on this whole thing.
That's where you started?
Yeah. Well, I got the click from there.
Yeah.
When I realized that the brain was included in this stuff that I can't prove that's out there, then it was suddenly, the whole thing was nonsense, and I started laughing, because...
I'm just wondering if I need milk tomorrow morning. It's complicated for me.
All right. And finally, God is impersonal. And that's implied by everything we've said, but I thought I would say that explicitly, because part of the purpose is to say things explicitly. Included in there is no God in the 3D world, which is nice and explicit, and people manage. You'd be amazed how many people manage to read Joel for many years and never accept the fact that there is no God in the 3D world. And he says that very clearly lots of times. Impersonal means that, first of all, it's not Jesus. any more than it's Buddha, any more than it's Lao Tzu, any more than it's you, any more than it's me. So it's impersonal in that sense. So we certainly can't tie God to Allah or Jesus or Lao Tzu or Buddha or Robert or anybody else. It's impersonal in that sense. We all are equally God. The only difference is the awareness. It obviously has no personal favorites. It's not influenceable. It has no personal favorites. It's not the least bit interested personally in any of us. We will all, yes?
I've had a difficult time because, Joel, especially in the last tape I was listening to, his view of Judaism is that it was, in my understanding, is that it certainly served its time, but that as consciousness, God consciousness, grew throughout, or transcended what it was in the human experience, that it's no longer valid. And the last tape, he said we can only know God as much as we exited our Judaic experience. And I'm having a difficult time as a Jew believing that no Jew that can have a God experience as long as they are in. I'm just having a tough time.
He is not saying that no Jew can have a God experience. He certainly would say that some Hasidic Jews are mystics. The Hasidic Jews are certainly the mystical sect within the Jewish tradition, and some Hasidic Jews certainly have had God experiences. I mean, there are just some wonderful Jewish mystics. What he's saying is that the fundamental structure of the Jewish religion is the Ten Commandments and law. And Moses brought law. Abraham brought one God out of many gods. And Moses brought law. And Jesus brought love. And these show increases in the level of human consciousness. And he's talking about the basic structure of the religion, not the particular people in it. He also says in another tape how most Christians are Jewish, in that they have dropped the love out of it and have gone back to the law, and they're working from the Ten Commandments rather than the two, and what they have is now a golden calf on a cross. And
what he's saying is as long as people are living according to the law, they haven't transcended the third dimension.
That's right. And the mystics, he didn't mention Buddhist mystics or Zen mystics or Sufi mystics or anything else. I mean, any religion that has a living sect, there are people that can have full-on mystical experiences and realize the whole thing. They've done it from every possible tradition. He's just discussing the nature of the religion, of the Jewish religion is law, and the nature of the Christian religion is law, but the religion which Jesus taught is I of my own self can do nothing, resist not evil, love thy neighbor as thyself, because it is yourself, etc., etc. And that's the next step in religion. And in fact, what Joel is trying to do is introduce Christianity to the Christian world.
Well, I was thinking, Adele, where Rashneesh talks a lot about that, about any religion. He says anybody that studies the rules and the laws, whether it be the Quran or whatever, and during the study of it, are missing what God is. They're missing the mystical part of it. They're into studying the law and the rules and all of that. If he uses that with every religion I've ever heard him speak about, which is a number of them.
And I agree with you, and it's just been very difficult for me to understand where in my Jewish tradition I can find God if all of it has to be discarded because it's based, the foundation is the law. I'm just having, maybe
perhaps you can't. Perhaps you can't. I mean, perhaps you can't. Certainly Catholics have to throw out essentially everything in Catholicism. It's wrong. It's a third-dimensional concept. And it will not, practicing the law, practicing the Ten Commandments will not lead to the mystical experience. going to Mass, taking communion, getting baptized, praying, doing Hail Marys, confessing will not lead to a mystical experience. And the only valid religious experience is a personal experience of God. Not understanding, not knowledge, not anything anybody else is telling you. The purpose is to experience God, and practicing the Ten Commandments and practicing Jewish culinary laws and practicing Christian not eating meat on Friday and practicing all these laws and rules and stuff will not bring you any closer to that experience.
Well, it says that the 12 steps will lead us to a spiritual experience, and the 12 steps are really basically the law of all religions in how one may
They are not law.
I disagree.
At all. They are not law at all. The 12 steps are spiritual disciplines which, if practiced diligently, will lead to a spiritual experience. And they are quite outside of Christianity or Judaism, although they are couched sometimes in
I would disagree with you, but we can have that conversation.
Okay, fine. I'd be happy to have that with you. No, they certainly are not law.
It would seem to me when you were saying that,
Perhaps tradition, law isn't the right word, but it certainly has in Judaism. Certainly.
What is it? What was the last
The
one?
12 steps
Or what?
are within the Jewish tradition. Every year, the Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, that's the 12 steps. I mean, it's the atonement and the recognition and atonement and every one of the 12 steps. So, but that's...
And the fact is that in most cases, the 12 steps don't lead to a spiritual experience of the type we're talking about. In most cases, the 12 steps lead to a place where people are able to stay sober comfortably. I mean, if 12 steps led to a spiritual experience, none of you would be here.
Right.
Let's face it, the reason people come talk to me is because I have something that they want that they haven't found in the 12 steps. You know, they don't lead to a mystical experience. They do. In fact, the moment of clarity is one. If you have that real click, you know, that may be one. But the 12 steps lead to a spiritual transformation, a different way of looking at things, you know, but, you know, some sort of a minor type thing, but they don't lead to a God realization. They lead to a change in reference. You can refer to a spiritual transformation as a change in the angle at which you look at everything, but... is it Will James? Is it in the Will James stuff that he talks about considering, you know, your relationship to the universe as where you're standing, you know, on a train somewhere and you look around, you know, and everything has a particular angle and a particular distance and a particular relationship to you. And a spiritual experience is when you move. If you move at all, then your relationship and your angle and distance to everything is different. And a knock your socks off spiritual experience is if you get picked up here and plunked down over here. You know, how far you got plunked down is the degree of the experience. And a few people like Robert got picked up left. but I mean, if what you're doing is realigning yourself with your understanding of the human world in such a way that you can improve your humanhood, that's a perfectly valid thing to do, and it may allow you to stay sober, and it still has nothing to do with achieving God consciousness. It may bring you to a point where you're comfortable enough that you can begin your pursuit of achieving God consciousness, but it's a different step. There's improving humanhood, and then there's working on God consciousness. And there are two different steps. Let's go back to the awareness exercise if there's nothing else. Did everybody practice? Can everybody increase their awareness of their left ear at will now? You weren't here for the awareness exercises, Steve? Cool. Okay, so everybody's practiced. So we all are aware of the fact that we do have an awareness faculty and that it obeys us It goes where we ask it to. It knows where that is. You don't have to give it directions to your left toe. It knows where it is. I mean, you just don't have to say, go down past the left knee and then hang a left at the ankle. And it knows where it is. And it is able to increase. Those were the things we needed to learn this week. Okay, now we're going to learn something else about the awareness faculty. So everybody close your eyes. And let's do one dry run. All right, everybody be aware of your right big toe. Okay, now increase that awareness. Okay, so is everybody's awareness faculty working? Okay. Now this time, be aware of I. Say the word real softly with me. Just say I. Just say it together. I. Say it a couple of times if you need to. Just very softly. Try to get the sense of I. And be aware of I. Anybody succeed?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
It's kind of weird.
Yeah? Did you do it? Do you have a sense that you have an awareness of I, whatever that means?
No.
You don't know. Well, if you had any thoughts going on or any mental picture going on, then that wasn't it. Mental pictures and thoughts don't count. This is, Barbara says over and over, this is not a thinking exercise, it's a feeling exercise. But say the word I real quietly and try to get a sense of I. Just what the I is of me, not body, not any of the parts. Let's try it again. Be aware of I. I. Okay. Anybody succeed?
So I'm not sure what that feeling is. It felt like I did.
That's it. If it feels like it, that's it. That's what it's a feeling thing. If it feels like it, that's it. If you can get a hold of it, if you can start hanging labels off of it, you know, I mean, if it looked like a bread box or something like that, that's not it. But if you have a sense of this is I, then this is it. All right, let's try it one more time. Let's be aware of I. And now increase your awareness of I. Anybody successful? Did it increase? Huh?
I think so.
Yeah? Where was it?
Well, I don't know. But I had something happen, and I'm not sure. Well, I'll explain this.
All right.
As I was increasing my awareness, I started feeling like I was getting a headache right here. I just felt pressure right here.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is that when I teach kids how to draw, I tell them to turn off their mind so they can draw. Many times they'll experience a headache when they're doing that, when they're trying not to think and be creative, because it's almost like the mind starts battling.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the sense that just came to me. I mean, there was nothing else there except this sense right here. And then when you said concentrate harder, I started feeling pressure right there. It was really, anyway.
I didn't say concentrate harder.
Not concentrate, but be more
Increase
aware.
your awareness, yes. Be
It was
careful about
interesting.
that. But
Well, that stopped it.
where was I? Where is I?
And then I felt that. The whole thing.
When you're aware of I,
It's like here.
inside your head?
No, I can't say that because it wasn't in the inside.
Yeah, it wasn't, was it? Was maybe your head inside I?
Mine was like a big bubble all the way around, and it included me inside of it.
Yeah. That's
So
the
when
whole point.
when I increased my awareness, it just broadened. It wasn't like a visual picture. It was just like it felt more
Right,
spacious.
yeah. That's it. So, everybody work on I this week. Work on being aware of I and work on increasing the awareness. And Joanne has had the experience that I is not within her. She is within her I, which you've been hearing about. All these mystical people have been telling you that for years. You just noticed it. It's true. So everybody play with that this week. And then we'll do one more step next week. Any questions? Any comments? Call me. Remember, between 6 in the morning and 9 at night, I'm here. And call me. And if you have questions or want help or want to know about this exercise or want to talk about Judaic law or anything at all, please call me. Okay?
I was just going to say that my I, when I was feeling that, I was non-existent. You know, me. And when I didn't...
Diane was non-existent.
Right.
But I?
But I was very, very feeling felt, and I have it in my meditations when I feel a sense of warmth and peace.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm observing. It's like Diane's observing the I, in a sense.
Diane's within the I.
Or maybe the I's observing me. I'm not able to explain it, but I'm non-existent. I guess when I did this exercise, Diane was non-existent.
So one thing about the awareness is that when you're aware of your right knee, your left ear disappears. If you play with the physical thing, you'll notice that every time if you say be aware of your right knee, fine, now be aware of your left ear, the right knee disappears. Similarly, if you're aware of Diane, the body will not be there. I mean, you won't be aware of it. What's there when we're not aware of it is an interesting philosophical question. Steve?
Goldsmith did something with this quite a while ago on the tape, and I had a really neat experience with it a while ago, but it wasn't the same as anything tonight. But I just...
No, he does.
We did this before.
He does this thing which is going through the body part by part, looking for yourself in there.
Right.
You know, that's his exercise.
No, it's very powerful. I was like...
For some people that works, for some it doesn't, for some this works well. Barbara says he's never found anybody that this doesn't work for, although it sometimes takes time. It often doesn't work the first time you try it or the first week. I mean, it takes practice, but she says she's never found anybody that this doesn't work for eventually. Okay, let's be quiet for about 5 minutes and put a cap on this.